Hello, and welcome to the Losers Club Book Reviews, where Luke and I will talk about It by Stephen King. It is around 1,100 pages, but might fluctuate a little depending on what type of book you read. Now, a short summary. So, it starts off with a bunch of kids that come together one way or another, all having their own stories, but each one seeing and believing that it is a real thing. The knowledge of it makes them come together as friends as well as create a strong bond. They mostly play in the Barrens, which is actually a very jungly place. This group also has to fend off multiple bullies, who create their own little group, which is led by Henry Bowers, the main bully, which creates another set of conflicts down the line, such as an apocalyptic rock fight, as well as each kid having their own story of trying to escape these bullies. But throughout the story, Stephen King switches perspectives through all of the characters as children and adults, which is sometimes very hard to keep up with, but allows the reader to see inside everyone's minds and what they were thinking.
Another interesting thing about this book is the way that Stephen King chooses to construct the plot. He fluctuates back and forth between them as adults and them as kids. This changes perspectives of the way they think as they grow up. It is also cool how the things he describes that they do when they are younger affect their future careers as adults. For example, Richie Tozier is always imitating people and using funny voices. He ends up becoming a voice actor. Also, Ben, the chubby kid, only wants to be skinny and in shape. Ironically, that is what he ends up being. I think it is cool that no matter how bad the trauma and things they went through as kids, they all ended up being very successful and wealthy. Another cool thing Stephen King does is that he might foreshadow events hundreds of pages before they even happen. For example, on page 686, the losers are walking past this area where a giant rock fight is going to happen in about 50 pages. One of the losers picks up a rock, and Stephen King says that this rock is going to hit him square in the head soon and will start an apocalyptic war with rocks.
An obvious feature about this book is that it's massive. It is Stephen King's second longest book, only trailing The Stand by about 15 pages. Luke, what do you think?
I also think that this book is massive in size. However, I do think there's places where Stephen King could have cut it, especially when Mike Hanlon went on his excessively long monologue about the history of dairy.
Okay, but is there anything you would add to the book?
Personally, I don't think there's much to add, but if he could add anything, I think maybe throughout the book he would add portions of history about it, Pennywise.
I agree. It would have been nice to see how it got to Earth and how he got his powers.
I agree. So do you think there are any more quote-unquote others in
Well, besides it and the turtle, Stephen King throughout the book talked about this other force, this light force that was pushing against it. But I thought for a while that it was the turtle. The turtle was pushing it back. But then the turtle died between the time that they were kids and adults, and I think it killed him. But I do think there was another, although I do wish that Stephen King would have elaborated and told us at the end, at least in the epilogue, who this other was and how he factored in and gave the kids his power. Do you think that one of the kids was a descendant from the other?
Well, if any of them were a descendant of an other, it would have to be Bill. He is seen as the leader throughout the book, and everyone is drawn towards him. He is the one that goes inside its mind, unites them, and in the end kills it. He's the only one that hears voices from a person, and although it may be the turtle, I think it was another other, and that it was guiding Bill through this almost impossible task.
Okay, do you think this connects to any other books?
I think that this book might connect to another one of Stephen King's books, The Shining. The stories share many similar characteristics and can be closely connected. The reason I think this is because the kids in the Losers Club are the only people to have ever survived the wrath of Pennywise. This could mean that they have some sort of special power, as they are the only ones who could fend off Pennywise. Another reason this could make sense is when Mike Hanlon was in the hospital suffering a wound incident. Pennywise used his trickery to send a false nurse to kill him. This was all while the other losers who were in the sewers looking for Pennywise sensed that he was in danger and sent him strength. This directly relates to The Shining when Dick Hallorann, a character in The Shining and It, senses that Danny is in trouble and sends him the strength to fend off his lunatic dad.
And speaking of Dick Hallorann, although I've never read The Shining, he does play a role in the history of Derry, as he is one of the few people to survive the Black Spot Fire, which Mike Camden's dad was in. He had sensed the fire was coming and instructed people to leave, which further demonstrates The Shining's presence in the It story. I also think that this book could connect to Star Wars, because Stephen King deliberately says that there's a light force that's trying to fend off this dark force, just like how the kids are trying to fend off Pennywise. Lastly, I think this book could connect to the Da Vinci Code, because in the Da Vinci Code, the Priory of Sion uses sex to get closer to this mythical being, just like how when they were kids, they all had sex with Beverly in order to gain more power and find their way back to land after fending off Pennywise.
Would you recommend this book to a friend?
Sure I would, but if you're going to read this, you have to be mature. You're also going to have a lot of free time, as this book is crazily long. And although it may get boring, you just have to hold it on until the end, because the end is the most exciting 100 pages that I've ever read in any book.
I would give this book a 5 out of 5. Even though there are excessive amounts of background information, I think it's interesting to read, and it gives a lot of background on the characters and Derry. So I give it a 5 out of 5, and I think it's a great read.
I think that this book deserves 4 out of 5 stars because the ending was amazing, but there was a lot of boring dialogue between pages 300 and 600. And if they would have gotten rid of that and added more exciting events, then I would have given it 5 stars. One thing Luke and I did before doing this podcast was watching the movie to try to find differences, and there was many. Although we may not know if the director of this movie was going to talk about the things in the second movie, because just like in the book, many of them as adults did not remember many things that happened to them as kids. So maybe the director of the movie deliberately left out certain key points that he was going to bring back into the second movie and then use the kids as actors to basically show them remembering the events. Just like how when they all finally got back to Derry as adults, they slowly remembered them. Another difference was that in the movie, there was no background of Derry. In the book, there was so much background, but I do think that because it was so long, that the director obviously had to cut out the history, because if he included it, it would have been 3 or 4 hour movie. Thanks for listening, and make sure to listen to all of our other previous book reviews.